Good morning, everyone. It's Miss J. I'm gonna start reading for you today from chapter 20, but I just wanted to say good morning. I hope you guys are doing well. I know there's been some changes this week to the learning or the school that you've been doing, and I hope it's going well. Reach out to me or Miss Douglas or somebody if you're struggling with anything, and don't worry about stuff, okay? My family's doing well, my dogs are well, and it's sunny today, which is very nice. I actually just went outside, but that's why I kind of have on this, because I was going to do it outside for you, because I think it's prettier, and I like it better, but somebody's mowing the grass, so it's too loud, so I couldn't do it. So I'm just going to read from you inside my house, okay? So we're starting on chapter 20, and it's page 226 if you happen to have the book. Okay, let's get started. Seraphina put on a beautiful dark maroon winter gown that Braden had given her the night before. The intricate black brocade corset felt tight around her chest and back, and she worried that when it came time to fight, it would restrict her. She twisted and turned to test her freedom of movement. The long skirt hung heavily around her legs, but even as unfamiliar as the girl's clothing felt, she couldn't help but be taken by it. It felt almost magical to be putting on a dress for the first time in her life. The material was fine and feminine and soft, like nothing she'd worn before. She felt like one of the girls in the book she read, like a real girl, with a real family, with brothers and sisters and a mother and a father and friends. She quickly scrubbed her face and brushed her hair and made herself as pretty as she could. It felt silly, but she needed to look the part. She tried to imagine that she was going to an extravagant dance in a ballroom crowded with glittering ladies and gentlemen and boys who would ask her to dance. But she wasn't, and she knew it. When she thought about the place she was going and the dark forces she'd meet there, it felt like she was jumping a chasm as she wasn't going to make it to the other side. She tried to block it out of her mind and just kept lacing her dress up her back with shaky fingers, but she was having a terrible go of it. Normal girls must have extremely long and bendy arms to do this every night, she thought. When she was finally done, she looked around at the workshop one last time. She couldn't tamp down the feeling that she wouldn't be coming back. She looked over to where her pa was sleeping. She had seen how tired and overwhelmed he was. His struggles with the dynamo and searching for her these last few days had taken a toll on him. She wanted to curl up in the crook of his arm like she used to, but she knew she couldn't. "Sleep well, Pa," she said. Finally, she gathered her courage and turned. She made her way through the basement and then climbed the stairs to the first floor. At the top, she paused. She took a deep breath and then walked down the darkened corridor of the house. She walked slowly, deliberately, not darting and hiding like she normally would, but walking down the center of the wide hallway like a proper young lady. She walked like the girl she had watched from the shadows so many times over the years. She did everything she could to take on the appearance of the helpless young daughter of one of the guests. She was no longer a predator. She was a vulnerable child. The air was very still. Moonlight shone in through the windows, falling onto the marble floor. The grandfather clock in the entrance hall chimed off the 12 bells of midnight. The corridors of the house were mostly empty because it was so late, just a candle here and there to light the way for guests. But she sensed that there were a few people still awake. As she made a slow promenade in her long, wide dress through the broad corridors of the house, it felt deeply strange not to be hunting, not to be the eyes of the predator, but the prey that is seen. Her stomach churned. Her muscles flinched and twitched, begging her to dash away. She hated walking straight. She hated walking slow. You're a normal girl, she told herself. Just keep breathing, keep pulling air into your lungs. You're a normal girl. It took every ounce of courage she had to just keep walking a straight line in the open. She'd come up against the man in the black cloak before, but she was determined to make this time different. Tonight, she was going to fight. Fight on her own terms and in her own way, with tooth and claw. She lingered near the winter garden, with its high glass ceiling just outside the door into the billiard room, where she knew from what she'd learned at Mrs. Vanderbilt's gathering earlier that evening, she had the best chance of setting her trap. Suddenly, the door to the billiard room opened. Mr. Vanderbilt, Mr. Bendel, Mr. Thorne, and several other gentlemen were sitting together in the leather chairs and drinking out of odd-shaped glasses. The smell of cigar smoke wafted into the corridor. Mr. Pratt came out of the room with a large silver tray balanced on his hand and hurried down the hall. Seraphina stepped into a shadow behind a column to avoid being seen, and there she waited, lingering on the edge of darkness. She was a china doll, and she was a wraith, in and out of the shadows, a girl in between. Finally, the fireside chat began to break up. Mr. Vanderbilt stood and said good night to each of his guests. Mr. Bendel shook everyone's hand and then retired as well. In the end, only Mr. Thorne remained. Seraphina watched through the open door, her heart pounding slow and heavy. He sat in the candlelit billiard room, alone, sipping from his glass and smoking his cigar. Come on out, she thought. We have business to attend to. But he seemed to be enjoying a moment of personal triumph. She couldn't read his mind, but she tried to piece together what she knew about him and imagine what he was thinking at that moment. After losing his plantation in the war and falling to the depths of ruin, here he was now, finally back in his rightful place, a distinguished gentleman of the highest order, a personal friend of one of the richest men in America. All he had to do to get here was steal the souls and talents of 100 lousy children with their small, frail bodies and their pliable spirits. But she wondered, why didn't he absorb adults as well? Were they more difficult? And now that he had achieved his position in society, why did he continue with the attacks and risk discovery? If he'd been doing this for a long time, then why the sudden greed for young souls? What was driving him to absorb a child night after night? It had to be more than just the pursuit of talents. It had to be a need greater than anything that had come before. She watched Mr. Thorne as he sat on the sofa, puffing on his cigar and sipping his cognac. There was something different about him tonight. His face looked gray. The skin under his eyes was wrinkled and flaky. His hair seemed less shiny and perfect than it did the morning in the tapestry gallery when she saw him for the first time, or when he arrived with the rescue party to take Braden back to Biltmore. Mr. Thorne set his empty glass on the end table and stood. Seraphina's muscles tensed. The time had come. Like the other gentleman, he wore a formal black jacket and tie, and she could hear the movement of his patent leather shoes on the billiard room's hardwood floor. But when she saw what he was carrying draped over his arm, her breath caught in her throat. It was the black cloak, satin and shimmering and clean. The cloak was as much in disguise as she was. To anyone else, it was but a fashionable covering. To anyone else, it might have appeared that the handsomely attired gentleman intended to take a quiet stroll on the grounds before he retired for the evening. But she knew the truth. It wasn't just a cloak, it was the black cloak, which meant he was bent on malevolent purpose. Here was her enemy. Here was the fight she'd come for. But she could feel her whole body quaking in her gown. She was scared to death. At least I'm going to die in a pretty dress, she thought. She walked out of the room and into the corridor where he walked out of the room and into the corridor where Seraphina was hidden in the shadows. She stayed perfectly still, but then he stopped just outside the billiard room door. He could not see her, but he could sense her there. He stood just a few feet away from her. Her heartbeat pounded. She had trouble controlling her breath. He was right in front of her. All her well-laid plans seemed foolish now. She wanted to cower away, to flee, to slink, to hide, to scream. But she steadied herself. She forced herself quiet, and she did what for her was the most terrifying thing to do in the world. She stepped out into the open. What's going to happen? All right, that's the end of chapter 20. And I will start on chapter 21. I'll post all this stuff for you guys, okay? And so you'll see it later. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time, okay? All right, bye. Love all you guys. Take care, be safe. Keep your distance. Bye.